Good day. I'm Adam Firecat back at my Scorpion laboratory in about the middle of the night. It's something I do. I'm about to enjoy my York peppermint bunny. It's something I get myself once every Easter. Pretty damn swank. Before I do, I had a thought about a specific word that we know is falsifiability. Falsifiability is how you answer the question, how would you know if you're wrong? Most people don't want to consider the idea that they could be wrong, so a lot of times falsifiability is not used in people's daily lives and in their belief systems about religion or politics, social issues. And it tends to be a necessary tool. If we're going to forge belief systems, we have to humor this idea that we could be wrong about something. It's something people don't really do a lot of. I understand no one wants to be wrong a lot. And if you look at people when they're inconsistent, it's been pointed out in some way, shape, or form, have been shown to be incorrect about something they thought was absolutely true, or at least partially incorrect. A lot of times I look at their face and it looks as if they're being physically harmed, they're being hurt in some way, shape, or form, and that's not necessarily a good thing, because it shouldn't be the reaction. Ideally, it shouldn't be the reaction. I don't know if we could contribute it to reinforcement that if you're wrong, you're dumb, or you're an idiot, or something like that. The idea that you could be wrong, though, means you could learn from it, and you could say, well, okay, what I thought I knew, I can adjust, and that's a positive. That's cool. I think the best way to go about it is, of course, falsifiability, as I've said before. It's how you answer that question. How would you know if you're wrong? Not how you would know if you were right, which is different in terms of, or people would prefer to believe something, so they will cherry pick the data. They want to know that they're right, and then you want to make sure that absolutely they're right, but only the data gets sifted through, or tends to be sifted through, that kind of supports a predetermined conclusion. To avoid that, we look for ways to discredit our own point of view, and that's how we kind of come up with a mythology for it. So if I say, I would say to you that things that are verifiable are necessarily falsifiable. Those two things are contingent. Some people think it's opposite because they hear the word false and then verifiable, and the same thing. And they've mistaken the word false and falsifiability as being, they sound similar and they have similar beginning words, but they do have two definitional different meanings. So here's how I would kind of give you a direct example of this in my own life. I have a Mitsubishi Eclipse. It's a 2001 Mitsubishi Eclipse. I've grown very partial to it. It had been there for a large part of my life when a lot of my life went downhill at a point, but I'll go into that at another time. What I know is I brought that car up, and I'd had it for a decade and a half after the former owner had wrecked it, and I had kept it with me for a long time. And it grew very personal to me, and it did end up dying because it didn't just have the mileage I put on it, it had the mileage the former owner put on it, which is a great deal. And it shouldn't have lasted as long as it did. Most of those engines, they die after an X amount of time. So it was kind of impressive that it had lasted as long as it had. Still, I had to park her one last time until later down the road where I could revisit the problem. Again, I'll go into that at a later date. In the meantime, I had to borrow a Jeep. And while I was borrowing that Jeep, I used it to go look around for new vehicles. And one of the new vehicles I found was another 2001 Mitsubishi Eclipse, black. It's almost uniquely the same, in that, excepting that it was standard instead of automatic. That I was like, I don't like standards, but it's getting used to another pattern of doing the same thing. I can drive a standard, I'm just not preferred. I decided to go ahead and take a gander at it. So I went to the record yard where this was being kept, and it was out of Pea Ridge, Arkansas. And I get there, and it's behind this gate, and I can't really get to it, but I can see it visibly. It looks exactly like my car, you know, in all regards. It's almost a twin. And I was enthusiastic, and it said on the windshield it was $1,000. So cool. I'll call them up and see if we can't work that out and give it a look-see. And I called them up, and the lady answers the phone, and I explained, so you have a Mitsubishi Eclipse 2001 out here for sale. I said, yeah, it's $1,000. It's a cheap car. Runs and drives great. I said, that's cool. Let's schedule a time where I can go ahead and drive it and around. And we'll give it an interstate test, and then I'll take it to a mechanic's and get an inspection done. So, you know, let's do two things that are kind of necessary, you know, to try to see if it's worth my money. She says, no, we don't let people drive it outside the record yard. I'm sorry, what? We don't let people drive it outside the record yard? Forgive me, I don't understand here. It's a cheap car. It's $1,000. Runs and drives great. I know that's the claim. That's definitely what you've claimed. So I'm asking how I would know that that's true. Not it's $1,000. You know, take it or leave it. I guess I'm not going to take it, lady. Look, we can either do that. Additionally, and I noticed that you have a mechanic shop next door to you, and I talked to them, and I said, are you willing to do a mechanic's inspection? They say, sure, but good luck getting them to agree to that. So I called them up again and said, listen, they're next door to you. All you have to do is drive it to them, and they will give it a mechanic inspection. So it's not, we don't like them very much. But, ma'am, your personal feelings aside, they have agreed to do a mechanic's inspection, which satisfy me, and then you want money for the vehicle, which satisfy you, right? Well, thing is, we're not going to pay for that. That's fine, ma'am. I'm willing to invest. I'm willing to invest the amount of money they need for an inspection. I'll do that. I'll do it because I'm that interested in the vehicle. She says, no, we're just not comfortable with that. It's $1,000, it's a cheap car, runs and drives great. According to you. But what if it's a $1,000 paperweight? It's too expensive for a paperweight to me. So sorry, that's just it. We're not interested in letting it out of the yard until, you know, if you want to give us $1,000, you can take it with you. Well, that's a bit of a problem, so I declined. As much as I wanted to know. The problem is I couldn't test against her claim. Her claim was that it runs and drives great, but how would I know if she was wrong about that? How would I know if she was incorrect? And the two great methods that one would use if you're doing any sort of responsible research, when you're trying to buy a vehicle that's used, oddly, you would expect that you should be able to give it a test drive and see if it performs well. It's not kicking out a bunch of smoke. It's not leaking profusely. It's not shaking horribly when driving down the road. Some alignment issues aren't a problem. You know, stuff like that. You give it a real thorough drive, and then of course you want to give a mechanic inspection. You may have to pay a little extra for that, but paying a little extra saves you from making a major expenditure and then it just failing because you didn't bother to do that. You can discover cracks in the manifold. If they're telling you it's leaking a lot in these areas here, or it's lacking these things that it should have and does not. You go through that and you find these things are problematic. Some things are easily fixable. Well, yeah, but it would cost you $200 here. So you might work it out with the person that is selling the vehicle. You might say, well, you know, a couple $100 is going to cost me to do that versus the cost that you want me to do that. So if I give you this much and that, and I pay them that much, that will still equal $1,000. But you know, it needs this thing. Can we work this deal out? She was uninterested in having her claim falsifiable, and made a great deal of stink about that, and just said, "We're just not interested in selling to you since you just don't want to just buy the car. It's cheap, $1,000. No, thank you." That was it. it's sort of disappointing that they would expect people to go without evidence of the claim being verifiable by not allowing them to test against their claim. But that's how we make responsible decisions. I hope we do. I mean, you wouldn't make an investment on anything, I would hope, without being able to know how you would know if they were wrong about what they were claiming. We got your investment portfolio lined up here, and we're making these investments here, here, and here for you. Well, right, but how would you know if these investments would fail? I mean, what's the measurement? So they won't fail, don't worry about it. Would you accept somebody working with your portfolio in such a way? Would that seem responsible to you? It shouldn't. You should be able to know. How would you know if the person investing your money was wrong about what they were saying? If you don't have a way to test against it, how are you able to then verify it? And that's sort of, it's in a nutshell pretty much like that. This is true about a lot of people's positions in religion and politics and social ideology, and it's because people kind of latch on to the idea, become hardened. It must absolutely be true. And if you ask them, well, how would you know if it's not? It doesn't calculate. A person tends to have an issue humoring the idea that they could be wrong about anything, and so callous does that grow in their mindsets. They are unwilling to adapt or to evolve from one position to another. I mean, I could be wrong about something. Who knows, right? And I would want to know if I was wrong. And that way I would be able to adjust what I believed I knew to what is now the truth of the matter. And that's sort of how falsifiability helps us, excuse me. It's an important tool in our day-to-day life for making any sort of responsible decision. And I hope that you embrace it and make use of it. And this is something we'll be hitting on later down the road, the more we start these discussions about how a person comes to a conclusion and what's their motivation for staying into that conclusion, and are they willing to falsify their own belief system. And well, that's all I have for now, but thank you for listening in, and I'm off to enjoy my Yorker Peppermint Bunny. Yum. Have a good day.